I'm 78 years old now, and my hands shake when I hold my coffee cup. Not from old age, though that plays its part. They shake because of a hill in Italy. A cursed, blood-soaked hill that I climbed again and again, watching boys who should have been dancing with girls back home fall into the mud beside me, their eyes going empty before they hit the ground. Monte Cassino. Even now, speaking that name aloud makes my chest tighten. People ask me sometimes about the war. Young people, mostly. They want to know if it was like the pictures they see, if we were heroes. I tell them the truth, though I can see it disappoints them. We weren't heroes. We were cold, hungry men who wanted to go home. And that hill, that damned monastery on top of it, it didn't care about our dreams or our families or the letters we carried in our pockets. It just sat there, waiting to swallow us whole. I was 22 when I first saw Monte Cassino. Felt like I aged 10 years in the 4 months we fought for it. The long road to Italy, winter 1943, World War II. I arrived in Italy in December of 1943 with the British 8th Army. The journey to get there had been long, training in North Africa, endless drills, officers telling us we were the best equipped force in the theater. They said we punched through the German lines like paper. They said Rome would fall by Christmas. They were wrong about everything. The voyage across from Africa was crowded, uncomfortable. Men packed into transport ships, sleeping in shifts, breathing stale air that smelled of oil and unwashed bodies. We played cards. Wrote letters home. Tried not to think too hard about what was waiting for us. I remember standing on deck one evening, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. It was beautiful, all orange and red, the water shimmering like liquid gold. A sailor standing next to me said, "Makes you think war can't exist in the same world as something like that." But it did. It does. Beauty and horror. Side by side. Naples was our entry point to Italy. The harbor was chaos, ships unloading supplies, cranes swinging cargo nets, military police trying to direct traffic. The city itself was damaged but still functioning. Buildings with walls blown out but people living in them anyway. Children running through the streets, begging for food or cigarettes or anything we might spare. Old men sitting in cafes, smoking and watching us with unreadable expressions. I bought a coffee from a street vendor, my first real Italian coffee. It was strong and bitter and nothing like the watery stuff we got in the mess. The vendor was an old man with a deeply lined face. When I paid him, he nodded and said something in Italian I didn't understand. Then, in broken English, "You go north? To fight?" "Yes," I said. He crossed himself. "God protect you. Is bad up there?" "Very bad." I thanked him and moved on, but his words stayed with me. The locals knew. They'd seen months of fighting already. They knew what we were walking into better than we did. The train ride north from Naples showed us what we were walking into. The countryside was beautiful, in a sad sort of way. Rolling hills, olive groves, ancient stone houses with their roofs blown off. But the weather, God, the weather. It rained almost every day. Cold, miserable rain that soaked through your uniform and settled into your bones. The kind of rain that made you forget what being warm felt like. We passed through villages where old women stood in doorways, watching us with hollow eyes. I remember one little boy, couldn't have been more than 6, standing by the road. He wasn't waving or asking for chocolate like the kids in the newsreels. He just stared at our convoy with this blank expression, like he'd already seen too much. I think about that boy sometimes. Wonder if he made it through. Wonder what the war did to him, growing up in the middle of all that destruction. The train would stop sometimes, switching tracks, waiting for another convoy to pass, reasons that were never explained to us. During one stop, I got off to stretch my legs. There was a cemetery next to the tracks. Italian, I think, from before the war. Neat rows of stone markers, cypress trees, a sense of peace. And beyond it, maybe half a mile away, I could see fresh graves. Crude wooden crosses. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't going to be like training. Men were dying here. A lot of men. My unit was assigned to a sector near the village of Savaro, about 10 miles from Cassino. It was supposed to be a quiet area where we could get used to the Italian winter, learn the terrain, shake off the rust from training. Quiet. That's what they told us. The village was mostly empty. The civilians had fled or been evacuated. Just a few old people who refused to leave their homes, sitting in cold houses with no windows, burning whatever furniture they had left for heat. We tried to give them rations when we could, but there was never enough. They gnawed their thanks, their eyes vacant, beyond gratitude, beyond hope. The first night, I stood guard in a stone barn that smelled like wet hay and cordite. The wind howled through gaps in the walls. In the distance, maybe 5 miles away, I could see flashes of artillery lighting up the mountains. The sound would reach us seconds later, a deep, rolling thunder that never quite stopped. It was like the earth itself was groaning. Like the land was protesting what we were doing to it. That's when I first saw Monte Cassino. Just a dark shape against the darker sky, with that white monastery perched on top like a crown. Even from miles away, it looked impossible. Too high. Too steep. The kind of place where men would die by the hundreds trying to climb it. The kind of place that would break armies. I stood there in that cold barn, watching that distant hill, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not exactly fear. More like recognition. Like some part of me knew that hill was going to define the rest of my life. That whatever happened up there would mark me forever. I had no idea I'd be one of the men who'd have to try. No idea how many times I'd climb that cursed slope. No idea how many friends I'd leave behind in the mud and rocks. But I'd learn. God help me, I'd learn. The Gustav Line defenses World War II. The Germans had built something terrible across Italy. They called it the Gustav Line, and it was the most sophisticated defensive position I'd ever seen. And I saw plenty before the war ended. The line ran coast to coast across the narrowest part of Italy, using every river, every mountain, every natural obstacle they could find. But the center, the heart of it, was anchored on Monte Cassino. That hill controlled everything. The Liri Valley, which was the only decent tank country leading to Rome. The Rapido River, which ran swift and cold at the base of the mountain. All of it funneled right into hat-killing ground. The Germans weren't stupid. They'd had months to prepare. Every approach was covered by machine gun nests. The slopes were mined. The river banks were strung with barbed wire. The town of Cassino itself had been turned into a fortress, every building a potential bunker, every cellar a fighting position. And above it all, that monastery. We heard it was founded by some saint back in the 6th century. 1,500 years of history, looking down on us like the eye of God. I talked to some American soldiers who'd been there since January. They'd tried to cross the Rapido River and push through Cassino. One sergeant, his name was Michael, from somewhere in Texas, he told me about it while we shared a cigarette in a ruined farmhouse. It was a slaughterhouse, he said, his voice flat. We tried to cross at night. The current was faster than they told us. Engineers couldn't get the bridges up, Germans were hitting them with mortars before they could finish. Some boys drowned in the river. Others made it across and got cut to pieces in the wire. I heard boys screaming all night. Couldn't reach them. Couldn't do a damn thing but listen to them die. He took a long drag, his hand shaking slightly. We went in with 2,000 men. Maybe half came back. And we didn't gain a single yard that stayed ours. That conversation stayed with me. When you hear something like that, you start to understand what you're facing. This isn't a battle you win with courage or good tactics. It's a battle where you measure success in yards, in hours, in how many of your friends make it through the night. Italian winter conditions 1944 World War II. February in Italy. I remember it like it was yesterday, though 7 decades have passed. People think of Italy and they imagine sunshine, wine, beautiful women. But winter in the mountains of central Italy is something else entirely. It's a cold that gets inside you and never quite leaves. We were billeted in whatever Buildings still had walls. Barns, mostly. Sometimes just the ruins of farmhouses, trying to find shelter behind broken walls. The rain came in sheets, day after day. The ground turned to mud, thick, sucking mud that pulled at your boots with every step. You'd walk 100 yards and feel like you'd marched 5 miles. The mud was everywhere. In your rifle. In your food. In your clothes. You tried to clean yourself at night, scraping it off with your mess kit, but by morning you'd be covered again. It caked in your hair. Got under your fingernails. No matter what you did, you couldn't get clean. But worse than the mud was the cold. Not freezing, that would have been better, in some ways. The temperature hovered right around 40 degrees, sometimes dropping to freezing at night. Cold enough that you were always shivering, never quite warm enough even when you managed to start a fire. The dampness made it worse. Your uniform never dried. Your boots were always soaking. You'd take our socks off at night and they'd be wrinkled and white, your feet looking like they belonged to a corpse. Trench foot. That's what they called it. It could happen in as little as 12 hours if you weren't careful. Your feet would go numb first, then start to hurt like someone was driving needles into them. The skin would turn red, then purple, then start to break down. I saw men whose feet had swollen so badly they couldn't get their boots back on. The smell was unforgettable, a sweet, rotten smell that told you the tissue was dying. The medics were ruthless about it. We had to inspect each other's feet twice a day. They issued us 3 pairs of socks and ordered us to rotate them, keeping 1 pair inside our jackets to dry. They gave us whale oil to rub on our feet, thick, greasy stuff that smelled terrible but supposedly helped. If they caught you neglecting your feet, you'd be on report. They had to be brutal about it. Trench foot put as many men out of action as enemy fire in those early months. I had a friend named Jimmy, from Liverpool. Funny guy, always had a joke even when we were miserable. One morning I noticed he was limping. Asked him about it. It's nothing, he said. Feet hurt a bit, that's all. I made him take his boots off. His feet were blue and swollen, covered in blisters. Jimmy, you need to see the medic right now. He looked at them and laughed, but there was no humor in it. If I go to the medic, they'll pull me off the line. Can't let the lads down. I practically dragged him to the aid station. The medic took one look and shook his head. You're lucky. Another day and we'd be talking about amputation. Jimmy was evacuated. Last I heard, he was in a hospital in Naples, probably saved his feet but missed the rest of the Italian campaign. Sometimes I wonder if he was the lucky one. February bombing of Monte Cassino Abbey, World War II. On February 15, 1944, we got word that something big was happening. The whole battalion was pulled back about a mile from our forward positions. Officers wouldn't tell us what was going on, but you could feel it in the air. Something had changed. Around 9 in the morning, we heard them. A distant droning that grew louder and louder until it filled the whole sky. B-17 bombers. Dozens of them, flying in formation like great silver birds. They were American flying fortresses, and they were heading straight for Monte Cassino. We stood there watching, and I'll admit, part of me felt the power of it. All those planes, all that ordnance, aimed at that one target. Some of the boys cheered. They thought this was it. The Americans were going to blow the monastery to rubble and we'd walk right up the mountain. The bombs fell for hours. First the B-17s, dropping 1,000-pound bombs. Then B-25s and B-20 joined in. The whole mountain disappeared in smoke and dust and explosions. The ground shook under our feet even from a mile away. The noise was deafening. I remember pressing my hands over my ears and it barely helped. When it was over, the monastery was gone. Just rubble and smoke where that white stone building had stood for 1,500 years. We thought we'd destroyed the German observation posts. We thought we'd made our job easier. We were wrong. See, the Germans hadn't been in the monastery. They'd respected the historical site, kept their positions just below it on the slopes. But once we turned it into rubble, they moved right in. Those ruins made the perfect defensive position. Every pile of stone became a bunker. Every shell crater became a fighting hole. We'd taken the strongest fortress in Italy and made it even stronger. I didn't understand that at the time. None of us did. We just saw all that destruction and thought we'd won something. They sent us in 3 days later. That's when I learned the truth. First Allied assault on the ruins, February 1944, World War II. The attack began in the early morning hours of February 17th. I was with the 4th Indian Division, supporting their advance toward Point 593, a rocky outcrop just below the monastery ruins. The plan was to capture that high ground and use it as a jumping-off point for the final assault on the monastery. We moved up in darkness, trying to use what little cover the broken terrain provided. The moon was out, bright enough to see by but not so bright that we were completely exposed. I remember the sound of boots on rock, equipment rattling despite our best efforts to stay quiet. Every man trying not to think about what was waiting up there. The first shot came from nowhere. Just a single crack, and the man in front of me went down. Then the whole hillside opened up. Machine gun fire from positions we couldn't even see, raking our column. Mortars started falling among us, shaking the ground, throwing up geysers of dirt and rock and worse things. We scattered, trying to find cover. I threw myself behind a boulder, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Bullets were snapping overhead, that distinctive crack-crack sound they make when they're close enough to kill you. I could hear men screaming, calling for medics, calling for their mothers. I looked up and saw the monastery ruins above us. It didn't look far. Maybe 500 yards. In training, we could run that distance in a couple of minutes. But up there, 500 yards might as well have been 500 miles. We tried to advance. We'd wait for a lull in the fire, then rush forward 20 or 30 yards to the next piece of cover. Sometimes we'd make it. Sometimes we wouldn't. I saw a corporal, don't remember his name, stand up to run and get stitched across the chest by a machine gun. He was dead before he hit the ground. The Germans had the perfect position. They could see everything. Every move we made, they had an answer for it. And those ruins, the ruins we created, gave them infinite hiding spots. We'd suppress one position and we would come from another we hadn't even known was there. By mid-afternoon, we'd advanced maybe 200 yards. The cost was terrifying. Our company went up with about 120 men. By the time we pulled back that night, maybe 60 were still on their feet. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing. I remember crawling back down that hill in the darkness. My uniform was caked with mud and blood, some mine, some from helping wounded men. My ears were ringing from the constant explosions. Every muscle in my body hurt. I was so exhausted I could barely think. We'd gained nothing. Point 593 was still in German hands. The monastery still looked down on us. And tomorrow, they'd send us back up to try again. Life between assaults, February-March 1944, World War II. The days between attacks were almost worse than the attacks themselves. At least during an assault, you were too busy staying alive to think much. But in between, you had time to remember. Time to count how many free NDS you'd lost. Time to wonder if tomorrow would be your turn. We lived in the ruins of Cassino Town, in the cellars of destroyed buildings. The Germans held the northern part of town, and we held the southern part, sometimes with just a street or a pile of rubble between us. At night you could hear them talking. Hear their equipment rattling. Sometimes hear them singing. The smell was the worst part. Dead bodies everywhere. We tried to bury them when we could, but there were always more, and the Germans would shell us if we showed ourselves during the day. So the dead just lay there. Men and animals both. Mules that had been hauling supplies. Civilians who'd been caught in the crossfire. The smell was sweet and thick, and it got into your clothes, your hair, your mouth. You couldn't escape it. We lived on cold rations mostly. Hard biscuits, tinned meat that looked like it had been canned before the war started, tea when we could heat water without drawing sniper fire. You'd wolf it. Down not because it tasted good, it didn't, but because your body needed fuel and you never knew when you'd get your next meal. Sleep was impossible. Even when you were exhausted enough to pass out, you'd wake up every few minutes. The artillery never really stopped. Sometimes it would be distant, just background thunder. Other times it would be close enough to shake dust from the ceiling and make you wonder if the building was going to collapse on top of you. You'd fall asleep and dream of home, dream of your mother's cooking or your girl's smile, then wake up in a dark cellar with rats running across your chest and remember where you were. I wrote letters home when I could. Tried to sound cheerful, like this was some kind of adventure. Dear Mom, hope this finds you well. Weather here is wet, but we're keeping our spirits up. The Italian countryside is quite beautiful. Complete lies. But what else could I write? That I was so scared my hands shook every morning before an attack. That I'd watched a 19-year-old kid bleed out in my arms calling for his mother? That I sometimes lay awake wondering if the next shell had my name on it? The truth would have destroyed her. So I lied. We all lied in our letters home. There was a chaplain who came around sometimes. Father O'Brien, Irish fellow with a round face and sad eyes. He'd hold services in the cellars, reading from his Bible by candlelight, offering communion. I wasn't much of a religious man before the war, but I found myself going to those services. Not because I believed it would save me, I'd seen too many good men die to think God was picking favorites. But there was something comforting about the ritual. The familiar words. The reminder that there was still beauty and meaning somewhere, even if we couldn't see it from where we stood. Father O'Brien was killed in March by a mortar. Direct hit on the aid station where he was helping the medics. They told me he was smiling when they found him, still holding someone's hand. New Zealand and Indian forces March 1944 World War II. March brought a new offensive. This time it was the New Zealand Corps taking the lead, supported by Indian divisions. We thought maybe fresh troops would make the difference. They had tanks this time, Churchill tanks that were supposed to punch through the German defenses in Cassino Town. The attack began with the heaviest bombardment I'd ever seen. For 3 hours, artillery pounded Cassino. Then the bombers came again, more than 1,000 tons of bombs dropped on the town in just a few hours. When it was over, there was nothing left but rubble. Every building had been reduced to broken stone and twisted metal. We thought nothing could have survived. But the Germans survived. They always survived. The New Zealanders went in with the tanks, trying to push through the ruins. I was part of a support unit, following behind, waiting to exploit any breakthrough. We waited for hours, listening to the battle. Rage. The sound of tank guns, machine guns, grenades. Radio reports getting more and more desperate. The problem was the rubble itself. All that bombing had made the ground impassable for tanks. They'd planned routes through the streets, but there were no streets anymore. Just hills of broken stone. The tanks kept getting stuck, and when they did, the Germans would hit them with Panzerfausts, portable anti-tank weapons. One after another, the tanks brewed up, black smoke pouring from their hatches. The infantry got chewed up even worse. They'd advance through the ruins and Germans would pop up behind them from cellars and bunkers that had survived the bombing. They'd clear a building and move on, then Germans would reoccupy it. It was like trying to fight a ghost. An enemy you couldn't pin down, couldn't kill, no matter how many shells you dropped on them. By the third day, the attack had stalled. The New Zealanders and Indians were fought out, exhausted, decimated. They'd gained a few hundred yards into Cassino Town, but the monastery still loomed above us, and Point 593 was still in German hands. I helped carry wounded back to the aid stations during this period. The medics were overwhelmed. Men lying on stretchers in rows, bleeding, burned, in shock. The doctors and orderlies moving between them, doing what they could, but there were too many. I remember one kid, couldn't have been 20, both his legs gone below the knee. He was crying, not from pain, they'd given him morphine, but because he'd soiled himself and was embarrassed. Embarrassed. Here he'd lost both legs and might not make it through the night, and he was worried about that. "It's okay, son," I told him. Nobody cares about that. You're going to be fine. He died an hour later. Never even learned his name. Exhaustion and stalemate. March-April 1944 World War II. By late March, the offensive had been called off. Both sides were exhausted. The Germans held the monastery and the high ground. He held part of Cassino town and the valley below. And between us was a wasteland of mud, rubble, mines, wire, and corpses. This was the period when I came closest to breaking. Not from one big thing, but from the accumulation of everything. The cold, the mud, the constant shelling, the lack of sleep, the endless parade of death. You start to feel like you're not really human anymore. Like you're a machine that eats and sleeps and kills, and that's all. I remember one night in mid-April. There'd been a quiet day, relatively quiet, anyway. Just some shelling, some sniper fire, nothing major. I was sitting in a cellar with 3 other men from my section. We were trying to play cards by candlelight, not because anyone cared about the game, but because it was something to do. Something normal. Then one of them, a Welshman named David, just started crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears running down his face while he stared at the cards in his hand. We all looked at him, and nobody said anything, because we all understood. We were all one trigger pull away from the same thing. Finally I said, "You all right, Dave?" He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I can't remember her face," he said. "My wife. I've been trying to picture her for the last hour, and I can't remember what she looks like. I know I love her. I know I want to see her again. But I can't remember her face." None of us knew what to say to that. "What do you say? That it's normal? That it doesn't mean anything?" But it felt like it meant everything. Like we were losing pieces of ourselves, bit by bit, left behind in the mud and ruins of this cursed place. The quiet periods were when you noticed things. Little things that would have seemed insignificant before but took on huge meaning. The first wildflowers pushing up through the mud in April. A bird singing somewhere in the ruins. The way the light looked on the mountains in the early morning, before the shelling started. You'd see these things. And feel this strange mix of gratitude, that beauty still existed, and despair, because you didn't know if you'd live to see another morning like this. I thought about home constantly. My parents' house in Manchester. Sunday dinner. My kid brother, who was too young for the service yet. Walking to the pub with my mates. Such simple things. Things I'd taken completely for granted. I'd give anything to be back there, I thought. Anything. But we didn't get to go home. New units were arriving. Fresh divisions, brought in to try again what we'd failed to do. Among them were soldiers I'd never seen before. Poles. Men who'd been through hell getting to Italy. Men who had their own scores to settle with the Germans. Polish forces arrive April 1944 World War II. The Polish II Corps arrived in late April, and I'll never forget the first time I saw them. We were being rotated back for a rest, or what passed for rest anyway, when we passed a column of Polish troops moving up toward the front. There was something different about them. They weren't fresh-faced recruits. These were hard men with hard eyes. They'd been through something that showed in the way they moved, the way they held themselves. Later, I learned their story. Most of them had been deported to Soviet labor camps when Russia invaded Poland in 1939. They'd survived Stalin's gulags, places that made our Italian mud and cold look like luxury. They'd watched their families die of starvation and cold. They'd walked out of the Soviet Union through Persia and Iraq, an exodus that killed thousands more. And now they were here to fight the Germans who'd destroyed their country from the other direction. I talked to one of them at a supply depot. His English was rough but understandable. His name was Jersey, and he was maybe 30 years old but looked 50. "Why you fight here?" I asked him. "Poland is thousands of miles away." He looked at me with these flat, distant eyes. "Poland is not a place now," he said. "Poland is here." He tapped his chest. "Isn't us. We fight here, we fight for Poland. If we die here, we die for Poland. No difference where the dirt is." That stuck with me. These men had lost everything. Their country was occupied, carved up between Hitler and Stalin. Their families were dead or scattered. They had nothing left but each other and the fight. That kind of desperation made them dangerous. Made them willing to do things that men with something to lose wouldn't do. The Polish commander was General Anders. I only saw him once, from a distance, but you could tell the men loved him. He'd been in the Soviet camps with them. He'd led them out. He was one of them, and they trusted him completely. When we heard the Poles were taking over the Monte Cassino sector, reactions were mixed. Part of me was relieved, let someone else try that nightmare for a while. Part of me felt guilty, like we were passing our failure on to them. But mostly I felt pity. These poor bastards didn't know what they were walking into. How could they? You can't explain Monte Cassino. You have to live it. I was glad I'd be sitting this one out. My unit was being pulled back to Caserta for refit. Real rest, they said. Hot food, clean uniforms, maybe even leave to Naples. Then the orders changed. We'd be supporting the Polish attack. Not in the front lines, but close enough. Hauling ammunition. Running supplies. Evacuating casualties. So I'd get to watch the whole thing happen again. Watch another group of men throw themselves at that cursed hill and get torn to pieces for their trouble. Preparing for the Fourth Battle, May 1944, World War II. Early May brought better weather. The rain stopped. The mud began to dry. The days got warmer. Under other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. But all that good weather meant was that the attack was coming. The build-up was enormous. More troops, more guns, more supplies than I'd seen in the whole campaign. The Allies were going to hit the Gustav Line along its entire length, the French in the mountains to the north, the British in the center, the Americans on the coast. And the Poles would take Monte Cassino. On May 11th, the artillery opened up. 1,600 guns, they said. Maybe more. I was 5 miles from the Gustav Line and the ground shook like an earthquake. The night sky turned orange and red. The noise was beyond description. Not individual explosions anymore, just one continuous roar that went on and on. I thought about the Germans up there, huddled in their bunkers and fighting holes. Thought about the earth shaking, shells falling like rain, no escape, no relief. Part of me hated them, for all the friends they'd killed, for all the misery they'd caused. But part of me pitied them too. Nobody deserves that. Nobody. At 1 a.m, the Polish attack began. We couldn't see much from where we were, but we could hear it. The artillery shifted from general bombardment to walking barrages, trying to clear paths for the infantry. Small arms fire crackled across the hillsides. Flares went up, turning night into flickering day. And over it all, this sound I'd never forget, men yelling in Polish, voices carrying across the valley. Not scared yelling. War cries. The sound of men who decided that death was preferable to failure. .593 and Phantom Ridge, May 1944, World War II. The Polish 5th Kresowa Division attacked .593, that same rocky outcrop that had stopped us cold in February. The 3rd Carpathian Division went for Phantom Ridge, another hellish piece of ground that had defeated every attempt to take it. I was running supplies up to a Polish field headquarters, driving a truck loaded with ammunition boxes. The roads were chaos. Ambulances coming down with wounded. Tanks and half-tracks going up. Military police trying to direct traffic. Shells falling randomly, some German, some Allied ones that fell short. We got as close as we could, then had to hand carry the ammunition the last half-mile. Me and 3 other guys, lugging heavy boxes up a muddy path in the darkness, German shells whistling overhead. Every few hundred yards we'd pass groups of Polish troops moving up to the attack, or wounded men being helped down. The Polish wounded were different from ours. They were quiet, mostly. Grim. Even the seriously wounded ones weren't making much noise. They just grit their teeth and let the medics work on them, asking in broken English how soon they could get back to their units. One man I passed had his arm in a rough sling, blood soaking through the bandages. He was walking on his own, heading back toward the aid station. You need help? I called to him. He shook his head. Is nothing. Flesh only. I go, get fixed, come back. Come back? You're wounded. He looked at me like I was stupid. Germans still on mountain. Still fight needed. He kept walking. That was the Poles. They just kept coming. We'd failed to take these positions. In 3 previous battles. The Poles took them in 2 days. But the cost was terrible. The bloody fight for Monastery Hill, May 1944, World War II. The fighting for Point 593 and Phantom Ridge was some of the worst of the entire campaign. The Germans knew they were beaten elsewhere, the French had broken through in the mountains, the British were pushing up the Leary Valley. But at Cassino, they fought for every yard. The Polish troops advanced in darkness, trying to reach the German positions before dawn. But the Germans knew every foot of that ground. They'd fortified it for months. Machine guns had overlapping fields of fire. Mortars were pre-sighted on every approach. Minefields covered the slopes. I heard the stories later from Polish soldiers who'd been there. They'd climb the rocky slopes in the darkness, trying to stay quiet. Then a flare would go up and suddenly it was daylight and the machine guns would open up and men would fall by the dozens. They'd take cover, wait for tea. He guns to shift, then push forward again. Yard by bloody yard. On Point 593, the fighting came down to hand-to-hand combat. The Germans had bunkers built into the rock that couldn't be destroyed by artillery. The only way to take them was to get close enough to throw grenades through the firing slits, or to climb on top and drop charges down the ventilation shafts. Men died in groups, bunching up to assault these positions, getting cut down by crossfire from other bunkers. A Polish corporal I met later told me about taking one bunker. They'd lost 15 men trying to get close to it. Finally, 3 men made it to the entrance. One threw in grenades, the second charged in firing his rifle, the third followed with a flamethrower. The bunker went silent. When they went in to clear it, they found 11 Germans dead inside. The German officer in charge had shot himself rather than surrender. The attack on Phantom Ridge was even worse. The ridge was narrow, maybe 30 yards wide in places, with steep drops on both sides. The Germans held the high end, and any attack had to come along that narrow spine with no cover. The Poles tried 3 times on the first night. Each time, they got within 50 yards of the German positions and got thrown back by machine gun fire and grenades. On the 4th attempt, they went in with bayonets fixed, not even firing their rifles, just screaming and running straight at the German positions. Hand to hand in the darkness. Men grappling in the dirt, stabbing with knives, bashing with rifle butts. More primitive than medieval. By dawn, the Poles held the ridge. Of the company that made the final assault, 17 men walked off that ridge alive. They'd started with nearly 100. German paratroopers, World War II. The Germans defending Monte Cassino weren't ordinary troops. They were Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers. Elite soldiers. The best Germany had. They'd been fighting in Italy for months and knew their business. I saw some of them after they were captured. Dirty, exhausted, but still carrying themselves with a kind of pride. One was just a kid, maybe 19. He spoke a little English. He was waiting with other prisoners to be transported to the rear, and I was on guard duty. Why you fight so hard? I asked him. The war is lost. You know this. He shrugged. Orders. We have orders to hold. But so many of your friends are dead. For what? He looked at me with these tired eyes. For what you fight. Is the same. We fight because is our duty. Is what soldiers do. I couldn't argue with that. He was right. We were all just soldiers following orders, trying to survive. The politics, the reasons, the grand strategy, that was for the generals and politicians. For us, it was just about holding your ground or taking the next hill or keeping your friends alive. That German kid didn't make it back to the prison camp. His group was being marched to the rear when German artillery, not knowing their own men, there, started shelling the road. 3 prisoners and 1 guard were killed. War's funny that way. You can survive months of the worst fighting, and then catch a random shell a mile from the front. The final Polish push, May 17 to 18, 1944, World War II. By May 17, the Poles held most of the high ground around the monastery, but they hadn't taken the monastery itself. The Germans were down to a few hundred defenders, but they were still fighting. The Polish attack went in at dawn. Not a big assault, they didn't have the men left for that. Just a few companies, advancing through the ruins of the monastery, clearing bunkers and pillboxes one at a time. The Germans fought for every pile of rubble. I was at the Polish headquarters by then, helping coordinate supply runs. The radio reports coming in were terse, clinical. Bunker Complex A cleared. 12 casualties. Moving to Objective B. But behind each report was a story of young men dying among 1,500-year-old ruins, fighting and bleeding over ground that had seen countless other wars. Around 2 in the afternoon on May 18th, the radio crackled. A Polish voice, excited, speaking too fast for me to understand. Then an English-speaking officer translated. "They're in the monastery. Germans withdrawing. They're raising the flag." The headquarters erupted. Men were cheering, hugging each other, crying. After 4 months of failure, after 25,000 Allied casualties, after all the false starts and bloody defeats, we'd finally taken Monte Cassino. I stood there watching them celebrate and felt nothing. Not joy. Not relief. Just this vast exhaustion. We'd won. We'd taken a hill. And the cost had been staggering. 55,000 Allied casualties total. 20,000 German. For one hill. One monastery. Was it worth it? I don't know. I've had 70 years to think about it, and I still don't know. The ruins of Monte Cassino, World War II. They sent me up to the monastery a few days later with a supply detail. The road up the mountain was freshly cleared, but you could see the debris pushed to the sides. Burnout tanks. Abandoned equipment. Unmarked graves. The monastery itself was just rubble. Not a single wall standing higher than 10 feet. The bombs and shells had done their work thoroughly. Walking through it was like walking through a graveyard. Everywhere you looked, you could see where men had fought and died. Bullet marks on the stones. Bloodstains that the rain hadn't washed away. Pieces of equipment. A boot with a foot still in it, half buried in the dirt. The smell was overwhelming. Death and cordite and smoke. Bodies were still being pulled from the rubble. Most were Germans, but there were Poles too, men who'd fallen in the final assault. The burial details worked methodically, wrapping bodies in whatever they could find, carrying them down to temporary cemeteries. I stood at the highest point of the ruins, where the altar had been, and looked out over the valley. From up here, you could see everything. The Liri Valley stretching into the distance. The Rapido River, just a silver thread from this height. The ruins of Cassino Town. All the ground we'd fought over for 4 months, laid out like a map. And I understood, finally, why so many men had died for this place. Whoever held this hill controlled everything. Every road, every river crossing, every approach. No wonder the Germans had fought so hard to keep it. No wonder we paid such a price to take it. But understanding didn't make me feel any better. It just made the whole thing seem more futile. All that death and suffering, for a pile of rocks. A Polish soldier came and stood next to me. An officer, judging by his rank insignia. We stood in silence for a while, looking out over the valley. "It's hard to believe is over," he said finally. "Yeah," I agreed. "My brother died here," he said. 3 days ago. He was in first assault on monastery. I have not even found his body yet. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." He nodded. He wanted to see Poland free. We all want this. Now. He gestured vaguely at the ruins. Now we fight more. Always more fighting. But Poland is still not free. Maybe after the war. I said, knowing it was hollow. He looked at me with sad eyes. maybe. Or maybe we die first. He walked away, leaving me alone among the ruins. I thought about all the soldiers I'd seen die in the last 4 months. British, American, Indian, New Zealand, Polish, German. All of them fighting for their own reasons. All of them dead just the same. Polish cemetery, Monte Cassino, World War II. The Poles built a cemetery on the slopes of Monte Cassino for their dead. Over 1,000 graves, each marked with a simple white cross. I visited it years later, long after the war ended. An old man by then, making a pilgrimage to the places where I'd been young. The cemetery is beautiful, in a heartbreaking sort of way. Perfectly maintained, with gardens and paths. Each grave has the soldier's name, rank, and age. I walked through reading them. So many were younger than I'd been. Boys of 19, 20. Some as young as 17. There's an inscription at the entrance, in Polish and English. We Polish soldiers, for our freedom and yours, have given our souls to God, our bodies to the soil of Italy, and our hearts to Poland. I stood there reading those words and started crying. First time I'd cried about the war in decades. All those years, I'd kept it locked up inside. But standing there among all those graves, I couldn't hold it back anymore. We gave our bodies to the soil of Italy. That was the truth of it. We left pieces of ourselves there. Some of us left everything. And for what? Poland stayed under Soviet control for 40 years after the war. Those men fought and died to free their country, and it didn't happen in their lifetime. But I've learned something in my old age. Maybe they didn't die in vain. Maybe the value wasn't in what they accomplished strategically. Maybe it was in the way they fought, for each other, for something they believed in, refusing to surrender even when everything seemed hopeless. That means something. Has to mean something. Living with Monte Cassino, World War II. I came home in 1946. Got demobilized, went back to Manchester, tried to pick up where I'd left off. Got married, had children, worked in a factory for 30 years. A normal life on the surface. But Monte Cassino never left me. Still hasn't, all these decades later. I dream about it sometimes. Not nightmares, exactly. Just dreams where I'm back there, standing in the mud below that hill, watching the monastery ruins above me. In the dreams, I'm always trying to tell someone something important, but I can't remember what it is. I wake up with my heart racing, my wife asking if I'm okay. The sounds bother me sometimes. Thunder. Fireworks. Anything that sounds like artillery. My hands start shaking and I am back there, huddled in a cellar, waiting for the next shell to fall. It's gotten better over the years, but it never completely goes away. I don't talk about the war much. People ask occasionally, especially the younger generation. They want to hear about heroism and glory. I tell them it wasn't like that. It was just cold, scared men trying not to die. They look disappointed, like I'm cheating them of something. Maybe I am. Maybe they need the hero stories. But I lived through it, and I know the truth. War isn't heroic. It's just terrible. The heroism, when it happens, is in the small moments. The man who shares his last cigarette. The medic who runs into fire to pull out a wounded soldier. The soldier who holds your hand when you're scared. That's where the heroism was, in those little human moments. Messages to the future World War II. I'm 78 now and my time is running out. My doctor tells me my heart's worn out, which makes sense. It's been carrying the weight of Monte Cassino for more than 70 years. What do I want people to know? What lessons should they take from what we went through? First, that war is never as simple as the history books make it sound. It's not lines on a map or arrows pointing at strategic objectives. It's individual human beings suffering and dying in the mud. Every name on a war memorial represents someone who never got to grow old, never got to have the life I've had. Someone who left family behind who grieved forever. Second, that soldiers aren't heroes or villains. We're just ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Some of us did brave things. Some of us did cowardly things. Most of us did both, sometimes in the same day. We were human, with all the flaws and strengths that implies. Third, that the cost of war always exceeds the value. Even when the cause is just, and beating Hitler was as just a cause as you can get, the price is terrible. We broke the Gustav Line and opened the road to Rome. Was it worth 55,000 Allied casualties? 20,000 German? I honestly don't know. How do you calculate that kind of math? Finally, that memory matters. The older I get, the fewer of us are left who remember. Soon, all us old soldiers will be gone and Monte Cassino will be just another entry in a history book. Just dates and numbers and strategic analyses. But it was real. It happened. Men fought and died there, and their sacrifice means something. I think about the Polish soldier who told me his brother died in the monastery assault. Wonder if he survived the war. Wonder if he ever got to see Poland free. Probably not. Most of those Polish veterans ended up living in exile, their homeland still occupied, just by different masters. I think about Jimmy with his trench foot, evacuated before the worst of the fighting. Hope he made it home. Hope he kept his feet. I think about Father O'Brien, smiling even as he died, still holding someone's hand. I think about that German kid who got killed by his own artillery while being marched to the rear. Wonder what his parents were told. If they even got his body back. What war takes from you, World War II? People ask if I have regrets. Of course I do. I regret every friend I lost. Every wounded man I couldn't save. Every moment of fear and suffering that marked me permanently. But if you're asking if I regret serving, if I wish I hadn't gone, no. Someone had to stop Hitler. Someone had to stand up. And when your country calls, you go, even knowing what it might cost. What I regret is what war does to you. How it changes you in ways you can't change back. Before Monte Cassino, I was a different person. Lighter somehow. Life had possibility. Even after I came home, even with my wonderful wife and beautiful children, there's always been this shadow. This knowledge of how bad things can get. How quickly civilization falls away. How thin the line is between life and death. I look at my grandchildren now and I see their innocence, and I'm grateful they've grown up in peace. But I also know how fragile that peace is. How quickly it could all come apart again. That knowledge is a burden. You carry it always, and you can never put it down. The war took things from me I didn't even know I had. Some lightness of spirit. Some basic trust in the world. The ability to hear thunder without flinching. The ability to sleep through the night without dreaming of dead friends. But it gave me things too, though I hesitate to call them gifts. A deep appreciation for ordinary moments. A morning cup of tea. A conversation with my wife. Watching my children play. These tiny, perfect moments that most people take for granted, I treasure them, because I know how easily they can be taken away. And it gave me brotherhood. I know what it's like to trust someone with your life. To stand shoulder to shoulder with other men and face something terrifying together. Most people never experience that kind of bond. It's a strange gift, bought at a terrible price. The men we left behind World War II. The thing that haunts me most, after all these years, is thinking about the men who didn't come home. Not just that they died, I saw plenty of death and came to terms with it, as much as anyone can. But thinking about all the lives they didn't get to live. They didn't get to go home and kiss their wives. Didn't get to meet their children, who were born while they were overseas. Didn't get to see their parents again, or their brothers and sisters. All those reunions that never happened. There was a boy in my section named Robert. Called him Robbie. He was 19, from somewhere in Cornwall. Had a girl back home he was planning to marry. Showed me her picture once, pretty thing with dark hair, smiling at the camera. He carried her letters in his breast pocket, close to his heart. Used to read them over and over until they were falling apart at the folds. Robbie got hit by a sniper on February 21st. We were moving up to relieve another unit. Single shot clean through the head. He was dead before he hit the ground. I was walking right next to him, close enough to feel the spray of blood. 1 second he was there, talking about what he'd do when he got home, the next he was gone. We buried him in a temporary cemetery outside Cassino. Wrapped in a blanket, no coffin. Father O'Brien said some words over him. I took the letters out of his pocket before we buried him, thought someone should send them back to his girl. But I never did. Kept meaning to, but couldn't find the words to write to her. What do you say? Your boy died next to me and I lived. Sorry, but that's just how it worked out. I still have those letters somewhere. Kept them all these years, don't even know why. Every now and then I take them out and read them, this girl pouring her heart out to a boy who never made it home. I'm counting the days until you return, one of them says. We'll have such a wonderful life together. She never got that life. Neither did he. They didn't get to experience peace. Didn't get to feel the relief of war ending, of laying down the burden and going back to normal life. They died still carrying that weight, still in the middle of it, never knowing how it would end. There was a sergeant, Welsh fellow named Davies. Tough as nails, kept us all in line, but fair about it. He'd been through North Africa, seen hard fighting at El Alamein. Nothing seemed to rattle him. But I caught him crying once, behind a ruined house, after we'd lost half the platoon in a single day. He saw me and wiped his face quickly, embarrassed. Sorry, lad, he said. It's a lot sometimes. Yes, Sergeant. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Got a son back home. He'd be about your age. Keep thinking, what if it was him? What if he was here instead of me? Is he in the service? Too young. Thank God. He took a long drag. After this is over, I'm going to hold him so tight. Tell him I love him every single day. War teaches you that, at least. Don't waste time. Tell the people you love that you love them. Davies died 3 weeks later. Mortar hit the command post where he was meeting with the officers. They found him with his hands still clutching a photograph, his son, I imagine, though I never saw it. Did his boy know how much his father loved him? I hope so. God, I hope so. They didn't get to grow old. Didn't get to see their children grow up, or hold their grandchildren. Didn't get to sit in a garden on a summer evening with nothing more pressing to worry about than what to have for dinner. All those unlived lives. All that potential, lost in the mud of Italy. The books they never wrote, the children they never had, the love they never got to share. The ordinary, beautiful, mundane moments that make up a life, all of it gone, snuffed out on a hillside in a country most of them had never even heard of before the war. I carry them with me. Not just their names, though I remember as many as I can, but their absence. Every milestone in my life, every moment of joy, there's this quiet awareness that they're not here to share it. That I got to have this life and they didn't. When my first child was born, I held her and felt this overwhelming love, this fierce protectiveness. And then I thought, Robbie never got this. Davies never got to see his son grow up. All those boys rotting in Italian soil never got to know this feeling. Why did I survive when so many better men died? I've asked myself that question 10,000 times. There's no answer. No reason. Just luck. I was standing in the right place when the shell fell. I zigged instead of zagged. The sniper's bullet missed me by inches and hit the man behind me. Pure chance, nothing more. But the guilt stays with you. Survivor's guilt, they call it now. Back then, we didn't have a name for it. We just carried it, this weight that never quite goes away. This feeling that you don't deserve the life you have, that you should have been the one who died instead. I had a friend in my unit, before Monte Cassino, named Thomas. Good man, had a quick wit, always made us laugh even when things were miserable. He saved my life once, pulled me into cover when I was about to step on a mine. Watch yourself, mate, he said like it was nothing. Thomas got killed in the January offensive. Grenade landed in his foxhole. He could have run, might have made it. Instead, he threw himself on top of it, shielded 2 other men who were in there with him. They lived. He didn't. Nothing left of him but pieces. One of the men he saved went on to become a teacher. Had 4 children, 10 grandchildren last I heard. All those lives, all that joy, because Thomas made a split-second decision to sacrifice himself. But Thomas never got any of it. Never got to see the results of his courage. Just died in that hole, 20 years old, and that was the end of his story. Is that FAI? R? No. Is there any sense to it? No. It's just what war does. It takes the good with the bad, the brave with the cowardly, the young with the old. It doesn't discriminate. It just takes and takes and takes until there's nothing left to take. And those of us who survived? We carry the weight. We live the lives they never got to live. We try to make it mean something, though I'm not sure we ever really succeed. Every year on the anniversary of Cassino, May 18th, I pour myself a drink and toast the boys who didn't make it. Here's to you, lads, I say to the empty room. You deserve better. You deserve to grow old. I'm sorry you never got the chance. It's not much. But it's what I can do. Remember them. Say their names. Make sure their sacrifice isn't forgotten. Because if we forget them, what did they die for? If their names disappear and nobody remembers they ever existed, then they truly are gone. But as long as one old soldier remembers, as long as I can still see their faces in my mind and recall their voices, they're still here, in a way. Still here, and still 19 years old, and still waiting for a future that never came. What Monte Cassino taught me World War II. If there's wisdom to be found in all that suffering, and I'm not sure there is, but people always want lessons, it's this. First, cherish peace. Work for it, sacrifice for it, but understand its value. Because once war starts, it takes on a life of its own and consumes everything in its path. The lives it takes, the suffering it causes, can never be undone. Second, remember that your enemy is human too. Those German soldiers we fought at Cassino, they were mostly just scared kids following orders, same as us. They had families, dreams, fears. Killing them was necessary to win the war, but they weren't monsters. They were just men on the wrong side of history. Third, appreciate what you have while you have it. Life is fragile and brief. The people you love could be gone tomorrow. W. Tell them you love them. Don't wait for the right moment. The right moment is now. Fourth, never glorify war. Never make it sound romantic or glorious. It's not. It's the worst thing human beings can do to each other. Sometimes it's necessary. Stopping Hitler was necessary. But it should always be a last resort, never a first choice. And finally, remember. Remember the men who didn't come home. Remember their sacrifice. Not with parades and speeches, though those have their place, but in your daily life. Live well. Be kind. Make the world a little better. Because they never got that chance, and we owe it to them to make the most of ours. Looking back across the years World War II. I'm writing this in 2003, nearly 60 years after Monte Cassino. The monastery has been rebuilt. Looks just like it did before the war, they tell me. The town of Cassino is thriving. The battlefields are peaceful again, covered in grass and flowers. But if you look closely, you can still see the SCRs. Shell craters. Remnants of bunkers. Bits of equipment worked up from the ground by frost and rain. The land remembers, even if most people don't. I went back once, in 1984. 40 years after the battle. My wife came with me, bless her. She held my hand as we walked up the road to the monastery, the same road I'd driven trucks up during the battle. It was strange, seeing it peaceful. No explosions. No screaming. No bodies. Just tourists taking photographs and a beautiful spring day. Part of me was glad, this is what we fought for, after all. For peace and normalcy. But part of me felt like it was wrong somehow, that the ground should still be screaming, that there should be some mark of all that suffering. We visited the Polish cemetery. Walked among the graves, reading names. So many Polish names I couldn't pronounce, but I tried to say them anyway, giving voice to men who'd been silent for 40 years. I found a grave with no name. Just unknown Polish soldier. And the dates. I stood there looking at it for a long time. This man died taking Monte Cassino and nobody even knows who he was. That seemed like the cruelest thing of all. To die far from home and not even leave a name behind. But then I thought, maybe being remembered individually doesn't matter as much as we think. What matters is that we remember what was done here. That young men from Poland and Britain and New Zealand and America and a dozen other countries fought and died on this hill. That they stood up to evil. That they refused to quit even when it seemed hopeless. That's what needs to be remembered. Not my individual story, I'm nobody special, just a soldier who happened to survive, but the collective story. What we all went through together. The bonds we formed. The price we paid. A message to those who never fought World War II. If you've never been to war, and I hope you never have to, it's hard to understand. You can read about it, watch films, visit museums. But there's something about the experience that can't be communicated. The fear, the exhaustion, the way time seems to stretch and compress. How you can be bored for days and then terrified for hours and then bored again. Some things can't be explained, only lived. And some experiences mark you so deeply that you carry them forever. I don't expect you to understand. I don't even know if I want you to. Understanding might require going through something similar, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. What I do want is for you to remember that it was real. That the names in your history books were actual people. That every casualty figure represents someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father or brother. That war isn't an abstract political event, but a deeply personal tragedy multiplied thousands and millions of times over. When you see old veterans at memorial services, understand what you're looking at. You're seeing men who've carried terrible burdens for decades. Who wake up some nights still, thinking they're in foxholes. Who flinch at loud noises. Who carry guilt for surviving when their friends didn't. Be kind to them. Listen to their stories if they want to tell them. Most of us don't talk much, it's too hard, but when we do, listen. Really listen. Because soon we'll all be gone, and the only record of what we experience will be dry history books that can never capture what it felt like to be there. Final thoughts on Monte Cassino, World War II. Monte Cassino. After all these years, I still see it clearly. That white monastery on the hill, looking down on us like the eye of God. The mud, the cold, the endless rain. The sound of artillery that never quite stopped. The smell of death that got into your clothes and wouldn't wash out. I see the faces of men I served with. Some I knew well, others just names and faces. All of them gone now, most of them decades ago. They exist only in memories like mine, and when all us old men die, they'll be gone completely except for now. MES on monuments. Was it worth it? Did we accomplish anything that justified the terrible cost? The strategic answer is yes. We broke through the Gustav Line, opened the road to Rome, tied down German divisions that could have been used elsewhere. The personal answer is harder. Every man who died there left behind grief that rippled outward, touching families and friends. How do you balance that against strategic objectives? I don't know. I've had a lifetime to think about it, and I don't know. What I do know is this: we did our duty. We stood up when we were called. We fought for each other and for something larger than ourselves. We suffered and endured, and many of us died, but we didn't quit. That has to count for something. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the meaning isn't in the strategic value or the political outcomes. Maybe it's in the simple fact that when civilization faced its darkest hour, ordinary men from dozens of countries stood together and said, "No further. This IL stops here." We stopped it. At Monte Cassino and 1,000 other places, we stopped it. And the world that came after, with all its flaws and challenges, is better than the world that would have come if we'd failed. That's what I tell myself on dark nights when the old dreams return and I'm back on that hill, watching the monastery burn and hearing the screams of wounded men. We stopped it. We made it mean something. I hope that's true. God, I hope that's true. I'm old now. My time is nearly done. Soon I'll join all those boys I left behind on that Italian hillside. Sometimes I think about what I'll say to them when I see them again. How do you explain surviving when they didn't? How do you justify living a full life while they stayed forever young? I think I'll tell them what I've tried to do. That I lived well. That I cherished the ordinary moments they never got to have. That I told their stories when people would listen. That I tried to be worthy of the chance they never got. Maybe that'll be enough. Maybe they'll understand. Or maybe they'll just laugh and offer me a cigarette and ask if I remember that cold night in February when we thought the world was ending. And we'll sit there together, young men again, before everything went wrong. That's my hope, anyway. Not heaven with angels and harps. Just a quiet place where old soldiers can rest, where the war is finally over, where we can put down our burdens at last. Monte Cassino. It took so much from us. From all of us. But we took it in the end. We climbed that damned hill and planted our flags and moved on to the next battle. And now, 70 years later, I can finally say, it's over. I survived. I lived a life. And soon, very soon, I can rest. The hill doesn't haunt me anymore. I've made my peace with it, and with the ghosts of all those boys who never came home. We did what we had to do. We fought the good fight. And when the time came, we didn't let each other down. That's enough. That has to be enough. God rest all the boys we left behind on Monte Cassino. They deserve better than what they got, but they gave everything they had. And we remember them. Even now, all these years later, we remember. We always will.